Dear participants, welcome to this session. Welcome to this session that will touch upon the project Shift, where we look with several partners at the Sustainable Development Goals. We will talk a little bit about it, but we will not only talk about Shift. And I'm very happy to welcome Maria Hansen and our distinguished speakers. Maria Hansen is Executive Director of ELIA, the European League of Institutes of the Arts. So currently not directly working in the music sector, but she is very attached to the music sector, if I may say so. And she has been and still is very much involved also as board member of universities, music universities and orchestras, and former board member of ISPA, the International Society of Performing Arts. Maria, I'm very happy that you are with us here today to moderate this panel, and I give the floor to you and let you introduce the other panelists. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ruth. And hello, everyone, and a warm welcome to you all from the Netherlands. And thank you to the European Music Council for inviting me to moderate this session today. Today, we want to talk about sustainability development goals. Together with the other cultural networks, we are indeed working in this amazing Shift project about several of the SDGs. And I have to say, this work has really wedged this topic so firmly in the center of our mind. As leaders of cultural organizations, many of us are working hard to implement the values and guidelines that lie at the heart of these goals. But of course, that is not always easy. If it were easy, it would already be done. Some of these SDGs can actually clash with each other, not to mention that they might and will clash with our core business, such as having an international presence, to name only one example. To fire up this conversation with all of you, we have 3 invited speakers, all of whom are doing amazing work in this field. Sonia Greiner, Secretary General of the European Choral Association, Marta Keil, Curator of the Performing Arts Institute of Warsaw, and Holger Schmidt, Secretary General of Yourope, European Festival Association. They will all briefly tell us about their specific focus in the area of sustainability work, and then we will bring them together as quickly as possible into a conversation. We're keen to hear from you, so please contribute your questions and great ideas through the chat. I will do my very best to take as many questions and comments as possible. We will then go into breakout rooms so that you can all talk with each other in a slightly smaller setting about these topics. And finally, we will come back to the plenary to share great ideas out of the breakout rooms with all of us. And at the very end, we have a surprise 4th speaker with a wonderful contribution. Don't go anywhere because you don't want to miss that. But here we go. Let's introduce our first panelist, who is in Bonn, Sonia Greiner. Sonia has been Secretary General of the European Choral Association for 20 years, and she's also a member of the board of the World Youth Choir Foundation, as well as governance advisor to the International Federation for Choral Music. She served both the European and International Music Council in board position and has been an honorary member of the International Music Council since 2015. Within the Shift project, Sonia and her team are exploring the theme of inclusion, and we're keen to hear what she has to say. Sonia, please.
Thank you very much, Maria, for this introduction. I want to start with a very quick overview on how our association dealt with the SDGs in the last years. In early 2018, we did a think tank meeting where we talked about the future strategy for the sector in general. And when the first person dared to raise the SDGs at the time, the reactions were not quite as you might expect them. So our board was very careful about them. We did realize that there were some SDGs that we had included in our work for many years, like topics like gender equality, that we look at a lot when we curate our programs, or inclusion, were always on our agenda somehow, but we never concretely made the connection to the SDGs. And we never checked whether we were dealing with those topics on all levels of the organization or only on some levels. When the environmental topics were raised at this meeting in 2018, there was a certain resistance, especially in our board, to include them in our strategy. And I will come back to detailed reasons maybe later, but I think the main point was that they felt there could be contradictions between the environmental aims and the inclusion aims and the basic aims of our association. And there was a certain fear that we wouldn't be able to combine all this. In the meantime, however, we have included the SDGs in our strategy. And we decided to join the SHIFT project when the European Music Council asked us, where we're dealing, as Maria said, mostly with inclusion, though we are also contributing to the other topics, especially the environmental one. And filling the surveys for the different SDGs, I must say, already helped us raise awareness for those topics in our organization, because we realized it was not so easy to answer all the questions. And I think as a result of this process, we will be looking into which changes we can make in our association, but we might come back to that later. So when it comes to the topic of inclusion, that was our main topic. We realized, or we knew maybe already partly before, that there are many delicate issues to deal with when you want to talk about inclusion in an organization, but we were probably not completely aware of how delicate this will become. So while it's quite easy for a board to include the term inclusion into the strategy, there has never been any opposition in our board against that. When it comes to the details, you realize that you may have to take difficult decisions and that things are not as easy as they look. So already when we designed the survey on inclusion, we realized that there were a lot of questions. For example, how do you deal with inclusion in relation to the choice of musicians, speakers, and staff members if you also have other arguments that may influence your choice, like their experience, their quality, etc. If you have a team of 5 people and you have to employ somebody, do you really have to have or employ one person with a disability, one person with a different cultural background, one non-binary person, etc.? Or isn't that actually also discrimination if you only look at that? Can you judge the music program of an event only on the basis of diversity and inclusion? How do you recognize or see diversity in the program? Or if I want to be a bit provocative, is the skin color of the speakers the thing you judge? Or are the topics that the speakers are presenting? Or is it the culture of origin of the speaker? And if you want to have a certain percentage of people with disabilities in your panel, how do you deal with non-visible disabilities? How can you deal with inclusion and raising awareness within your organization if people maybe don't want to speak about this specific part of their identity that may be perceived as a group in need of inclusion, because maybe they don't perceive it the same way? Most of the topics we dealt with were quite general, I think, in the field of inclusion, and I think they would apply to any cultural organization or network. But we also came across one very specific topic I wanted to add from the choral world, which is that we have a tendency to speak about male choirs, female choirs, boys choirs, girls choirs. And we describe this in our concert programs and festival programs. And more there are people who are saying that this represents a problem for transgender or non-binary people if you use these terms. And you should rather use the voice and say it's sopranos and altos, and you don't care if there are girls or boys or men or women. So this is something that is getting stronger, and we already heard about that from Legato, an association for LGBTQ plus choirs before SHIFT, but I hear it more and more lately. Finally, maybe 2 more points. We also try to look at how to make our events or the events of our partners more inclusive. And also that is not always easy. How do you include people with financial difficulties, which are also a group in danger of exclusion? Who must cover the costs of accompanying persons if you need them for people with disabilities to attend your events? How can you make your communication more inclusive, both for your events and in general, as well as your general attitude? So when creating forms where people have to fill something in, but also when presenting speakers, I saw a very nice example of Maria making an inclusive presentation of speakers at a conference once. So there's a lot of things that you can think about, and it can be rather challenging if you want to think of all the groups in danger of exclusion at the same time, because even within those groups there might be contradictions. And the last point, you always walk a very thin line when you talk about inclusion, because the fact that you have to name the minorities, in inverted commas, that you want to include can in itself already be exclusive or discriminatory. And the aim of inclusion should actually be, in the end, that you don't have to talk about it. But on the path there, maybe you have to talk about it. And that makes things rather complicated sometimes.
Thank you, Sonia.
For the moment, yes.
All right. Well, that's a lot of food for thought, I have to say. And I just to go into the example that Sonia mentioned, I was indeed moderating one of these sessions earlier this year, and we were asked for the people that are can't see as well to describe ourselves in our introduction visually. So we gave, I said, I'm a white woman with relatively non-gray hair, but getting worse and wearing glasses and so on. And it was a really nice way of, it made it also more intimate. It had additional benefits to it. Sonia, I just want to ask you a quick question, because you did mention it. The clash with the environmental sustainability is something that I know has been on your mind. Can you just put it out there, because maybe we'll get one of the other panelists later to respond to that and see what we can make of it.
Yes, I think the first thing that came to our minds is that the core aim of our association is to bring people together internationally and to have an intercultural exchange through collective singing and collective music making. And I mean, the pandemic has shown us again and again that this is only possible if you bring people together physically, if you really want them to have this learning experience and this to meet each other as persons. And of course, this can very quickly be in contradiction to trying to reduce the carbon footprint of an organization. And also, when you look at inclusion, if you want to include people who live in remote geographical areas, this can be seen as a contradiction to the environmental aims. And even worse so, I think, when you start saying we can't organize events on an island or in Russia or in the south of Portugal because everybody will have to fly. So we've had that with one event in Ireland where people said, yeah, but you can't have a sustainable event in Ireland because everybody will have to take the plane to go there. And I think the conclusion I take from this is that very often environmental issues are too much only connected to reducing the carbon footprint through reducing your travels and your flights. And what we did is to try to analyze which other possibilities do we have to make an event environmentally friendly. Maybe the travel is the biggest issue, but it's not the only one. And how can we use our position to advocate for reducing the carbon footprint where it makes sense? So yes, people from neighboring countries should try to take the train or find other ways, but not to tell somebody coming from Malta, you should not fly, because then this person will feel excluded. So we also looked at things like reducing plastic at big events, maybe reducing the amount of meat you serve in the catering of a big event, to look at the marketing products you are producing, how can they be more environmentally friendly, and to use your position as a European association to advocate what the individual choirs and singers in their respective countries can do as well. Maybe that would be the main point for the moment.
Yeah, okay. I think we're going to park that for a moment. I completely recognize everything you're talking about because my organization does the same kind of international networking, and we are going to Tallinn in Estonia later this year. And indeed, the best way to get there, almost the only way to get there, is by plane. So this is complicated, but I'm going to park that for now. Now time to go to Warsaw, where Marta Keil is ready to tell us her story. Marta is a performing arts curator and researcher based in Warsaw in Poland. She has done many curatorial projects. She also teaches, but she also initiated the East European Performing Arts Platform, which supports development of contemporary performing arts in 18 countries of Central and Eastern Europe. which she founded herself 20 years ago. On behalf of IATM, which is the International Network for the Contemporary Performing Arts, Marta works on Shift for the package on gender equity and Me Too. She'll tell us a bit about that herself. Marta, over to you.
Thank you so much, Maria, for this introduction, and thank you, Sonia, for this extremely inspiring thoughts. I also do recognize a lot, and they echo so closely with, I guess, with the other values that we are trying to tackle within the Shift project. I mean, I do recognize a lot of concepts, dance, and reflections that kind of overlap with the discussion around the gender equity, or with the discussion around the sustainability, or again the political impact of it all. And just to maybe draw a little bit of a context from which am I speaking at the moment, and to also to explain why your thoughts resonate so widely with my own observations, that indeed at the moment I co-run a Performing Arts Institute here in Warsaw, which is actually, no matter how serious it may sound, it's actually a very small organization of 6 people who is at the moment working mostly only thanks to the transnational support. I mean, because the work that we are doing, which is trying to institute in the performing art fields otherwise, trying to introduce fair working methods in the field, is not necessarily recognized by the local funders as valuable. And that's the reason why it's only thanks to transnational connections we can actually do the work. And here we come back with the issue how, while following the ecological impact of the travels, not to indeed exclude or some of the countries or regions that are not necessarily situated at the very center of Europe or any other continent. But just as that was just as a side note, indeed, as Maria said, and we are working at the moment within the Shift project on the gender equity package, and at the moment, together with Marie Lesourd from On the Move, we are conducting a research around in the field of performing arts and music, and we do interview a lot of organizations, but also individuals who tackle the issue, trying to understand what are actually the already existing solutions, methodologies, strategies that we can actually discuss and probably also take further and learn from. So we are very much interested in the stories of change, or in the stories of the changes that could not have happened because of some reasons. And these reasons are exactly what we are interested in to tackle and to understand better. And also, it's really fascinating to observe how different the discussion, about the Me Too is unfolding in different countries in Europe, and to observe how the context is influencing the very discussion, the way how it develops, and therefore how important, again, the transnational connection here is. I mean, in order to understand better what has worked somewhere and can be brought to our own local context, or how can we actually share some strategies and tools, and also strengthen each other within the everyday struggles. And since we are at the moment exactly in the middle of the research, maybe what I could share with you today is first findings and reflections that we have so far. And one of them would be that when we speak about the sexism or sexual harassment or power abuse in the arts field, we don't only address particular cases, obviously, nor particular institutions or artists, but rather the very structures and that in which they do operate. And therefore, the question is much broader. It's not only about how particular institution or organization works, but rather how do we actually organize ourselves in the field? How are the hierarchies built? Whom do they serve? And here I want to quote Ilse Gekira, who's one of the initiators of the engagement movement in Belgium in the performing arts. And she said once, addressing sexual harassment will often lead to questions about local art canons and what artistic freedom can be, about representation and lack of gender diversity, about power relationships within working environments and the field at large, about art education, about what is being perceived as being normal, what is not, and how do we construct the norms. So that would be one of the reflections. The other is that while discussing the modes of working and addressing the safe working environment, we again not only speak about the arts field, but the very way how we actually imagine the society, the social relations we build, the values we want to put at the core of our society. So in a way, digging into this research, we realize even more than before how political actually this very issue is. So because what is at stake here is not only our own field, but rather a question for a space or a need for a space where we can imagine, negotiate, test, and practice getting together otherwise. So it's very, very broader actually, although it can be based on very personal experiences. And then in order to make a long-term change, or in order to create a safe working environment, what seems more and more clear is a quite radical shift in evaluating the art institutions, the way how they work. And here probably one of the tasks is to the funders, not only to the institutions, but also to the ones who evaluate how the institutions are working. For instance, whether we can understand the institutional growth not only through the numbers of the audience members, visitors, festival invitations, and so on, but rather can we understand the growth as the development of the quality of the relationship being created within the institution. And for that, we need much more time that we have at the moment. And in that sense, it seems really crucial to shift the evaluation a little bit from the product that the so-called product that the institution produce to the process and the way how do they work. And of course, this shift has to happen within the frames of the institutions, but very often as the institutions, organizations, or also individuals, we do operate in the framework that does not give us this time at all. So then the question is, how far can we go with the discussion to a broader political field? And then I guess what is really important is that we can't probably make a long-term change without also addressing a certain myths or a certain, so to speak, ideas that help us to shape how do we understand the art. And here I address obviously the myth of a master, of a genius individual, and this very old myth also that it's the struggle that makes the art great. And that may seem for many of us very old school and very obvious this is not the case, but very often it still seems to be. And what many of our interlocutors pointed out is that what first needs to change is the very culture of understanding what the art actually is, for whom it is being created, and how far can we actually change the way of understanding of the art from the figure of a master to a common effort. And here performing arts are probably one of the best examples of being really a collective, a common effort. And I guess, and that also applies, the very culture of understanding the art applies very much to the culture that allows us to understand, or a certain context that allows us to understand what is violence, what is not, what is fair, what is not. And here again, for instance, many of our interlocutors said that some years ago, some of the actions would never be perceived as violent as they are now, finally. And then the question is, how can we introduce, or how can we share the way of understanding, raise awareness of what can be violent to some, and how different perspective can change the understanding of a particular situation. And then maybe the very final point is that what we recognize within the research at the moment, that after the interviews, is that very much the so-called, if we want to approach the institution from a feminist point of view, for instance, it's never, or almost never, only about the representation. The quota can play a role, obviously, but that's just, it seems to be only the peak. And what is really important is indeed the structure and the implementing the feminism as a logic of working, not only as a representation. That would be it for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Marta. And I'm going to come back to you later when we do the panel together, the conversation, because you brought I want to operation. Thank you very much. That is a lot of rich food for thought for us as well. And I'm now going to bring in as quickly as I can Holger Jan into the conversation, and he may just be able to tie all the bits together. We are back in Bonn. Holger Jan Schmidt is General Secretary of Yourope, the European Festival Association, which is a very important, most important representation of European popular music festivals, with more than 100 members across 25 European countries. He is passionate and has been passionate about sustainability for many years, which includes work on an on a think tank, pan-European think tank about environmental sustainability, but also the international Take a Stand initiative and campaign for the live music sector, which was launched in 2017 to create a movement encouraging social cohesion in our society, as well as promoting awareness and tolerance. And it feels, Holger, like you're bringing all the aspects of Shift together in this work and making it very practical and concrete. And it's great to have you here to tell us more about that. Holger, please.
Hello, and thank you for having me, and thank all my fellow speakers for the great input they did already. Yes, it is true, and thank you for ticking all the boxes that I have written down here myself. To introduce you, yes, I work for Europe for quite some time, and I work in the European popular music festival scene for 30 years now. The topics we're talking about right now, 30 years back, played just a tiny role in when we started and curated and so on, but some like some social points and thoughts that we were thinking, this is left thinking when we have this kind of philosophy for our festival, because we want to include people, we want to show people of different skin colors, etc. Thinking back then it was like a left approach, and today it is sort of luckily a common sense to do so, and it's part of the SDGs. But of course there were changes, and I'm sitting in front of a picture which is the Rheinkultur Festival, which took place here in Bonn until 2011, and I was the managing director and promoter of this festival. It was an admission-free festival with 160,000 people on one day in the public park in the middle of our city, which is a water conservation area. So we were forced to think about the environmental impact of our festival from the very beginning. And this is not something that only we as festival promoters had to do. So there's all festivals take place in a certain in a society, in a venue, etc., with special needs. And so everybody has to approach their event or their art or their curation from their very own angle, which also leads to different experiences. And these different experiences get very important because they're worth exchanging. And that's what I do most of the time. Now I still work for festivals as the main stage booker for a festival called Das Fest in Karlsruhe. I'm the project manager for a dedicated area for sustainability and social engagement for the new founded Superbloom Festival in Munich, which unfortunately did not take place for the first time in 2020 because of, I don't know whether you heard, there's a pandemic going on. So hopefully in the not too distant future, I will be able to be part of that great team and that great event, which was created by great colleagues of mine. And so I'm still working practical on festivals, but I am also very much into facilitating the exchange between colleagues on, and then with a focus on sustainability, on the green issues, and also on social engagement. And you say I shall put the dots together. There were so many dots that Marta and Sonja raised already. So that would be a huge task. But I'm
going to help you with that, Jan. I wonder whether, because you've had so much experience with this and also, in fact, starting new projects, what would be your process in terms of managing these dilemmas? I'm sure you recognize the dilemmas, and indeed, they often can feel far too large for all of us. And of course, they are, because they are huge societal problems. Everybody around the world has to be dealing with, not just this little sector that we represent. But what is your process for yourself, but also for your organization, and coming to terms with these kinds of clashes and dilemmas when you're having to make decisions?
Yeah, for the association, I have to say that we are an association of like-minded people working, but on their very, very own philosophy. So it's a very heterogenic association. Of course, all our popular music festivals, but with different approaches from different genres in different countries. You said it. So we don't tell them how they have to do it. We moderate maybe a discussion on, and we make suggestions how things can be done. But in the end, of course, they have to do it themselves. But I also came across these dilemmas in my work for festivals, and the experiences, and I'm working on the green issues for almost 20 years now with the festivals that I worked for, and we were going step by step. So there was never you have to go 100%. Do as much as you can, and that already showed me that, all right, and that's life. Actually, life. What belongs to life very much is compromise. So we will never be able to fulfill 100% and 100% of the other. So if there's the dilemma that I want to have cultural exchange, but my policy is that I don't fly in artists, I cannot have 100% of both of those. And then it is, maybe it's a calculation. I'm sorry if I have to break that there's not the perfect solution one way, but I think it is a discussion. You have to spend the time, the manpower, the elbow grease, maybe, to come up with the best result, which might not be 100% both, but maybe you can achieve 80 and 70 or whatever it is, or 155. But then you have to find out what is most important for you, and which has the most effect. And it can also, sorry to break the news, it might also show you that you're not perfect, and I'm not perfect too. And that's if we start from there, it might help in going the way. And you will find out that if you do this for the first year, you will be better in the second, and you will even better in the third year, and even better in the fourth year. And if you look back, then you will see how much you achieved, and maybe it was much easier than you thought.
So there's a really good thought that we can take to Marta and Sonja. I'm hearing echo now. Is it gone now? I think it's gone now. Very good. So Sonja and Marta, you heard the idea. It's in fact, Holger Jan is suggesting that it is in fact a calculation that we have to make, weighing these values and taking a decision on that, and that the process of doing it is a really, really important part of doing that. How are you looking at that? I'm going to start with Marta and then come back to Sonja.
Thanks so much, Holger, and thank you, Maria, for this question. I mean, I guess indeed one of the findings and of the research, but also one of the experience that I personally have recently observing quite a big peak of the Me Too wave here in Poland at the moment is that no matter where the discussion is, no matter how the context allows the discussion to happen, we all seem to be at the very beginning of the process indeed. So it seems to be, I still feel, no matter whether the discussion takes place already since a year or since 3 or 4 years, that the process seems to be at the very beginning, as it is all about the practice. And when we seem to find out a solution that works well, it may seem that another year it will not work anymore, or another context it will not work anymore. It seems like there is no way to look for very universal solutions. And I guess for the shift research, that will be one of the biggest challenges: how to create a toolkit or a list of recommendations, and at the same time never forget that they are not universal, not applicable at every possible context. It's so much about the context. It's so much about the way how we make the process possible. And I guess here there are 2 observations I would like to share. One is that the process is crucial, but very often, especially when we are at the institution, when there is a strong leader on the top of, and that this very leader might not be willing to work and to offer the time to the process, then there is, I guess, this kind of maybe not pressure, but rather a kind of context from outside of the institution that is extremely helpful, meaning a larger debate, not necessarily in the media, but rather in the field in general, longer debates, also among the funders that actually prepare the programs and subsidy the very institution. That's another probably kind of angle of the discussion that can be very, very useful. And another observation is that indeed, in a way, all the process connected with the Me Too movement at this very moment seems to go against the mode of working we've been used to, meaning the product is the most important. It has to always be attractive, always attract more people, always get more promoted, always be better and better. And I guess that's what is probably the most challenging, is to indeed shift the perspective from the product, from the artwork, so to speak, not to forget about the artwork, but also to put at the core of the table the very way how it is being done. And therefore, not to, again, put, as Sonja was mentioning, not to put the term of the gender equity in the mission statement and tick the box, but rather really take it as one of the principal approaches to address the way how we work, to organize the work. And this can be utterly frustrating process, obviously, but I guess we just need to kind of let ourselves to acknowledge it, that it will be long, and really it can get frustrating, actually.
Yeah. Thank you, Marta, for that. And there's already a question in there for Sonja. But Sonja, take it back also to the suggestion that Holger Jan had, which was in a way an answer to your original dilemma.
Yes, thank you. I think something very important Holger said was that, first of all, you can't have the 100%, and also that it's a process. And that maybe when you are in the process, you have the feeling that it doesn't work, but when you look back, you see that it works. And maybe I can use some examples. You said kindly at the beginning that I've been Secretary General for 20 years, and actually I started working for the organization already in '95. And when I started, for example, we had a board of 13 people, 1 woman, 12 men, and the youngest person was 50. And it was a process of many years and very conscious decisions on how to find candidates for elections, for example, that to make it very provocative, the white gray-haired men would come by themselves. But if you wanted to have young women from Eastern Europe, you maybe had to go and find them. You had to make sure that all the meetings were financially supported so that there was no financial difference, etc. And we created a youth committee, and we looked at gender equity in our boards, etc., commissions, consciously for a number of years. And now we are at the point where we are quite naturally getting a healthy mix of different ages, different genders, different nationalities and backgrounds. So this is a process. And if you had asked me in 1998, I would have said I will never have a board that is 50-50 men and women, because with these members, it will never work. And in the end, it did work, but you need to have strategies, I think, in place. And the second thing I experienced is the first time you say that, especially as a woman, you are often confronted with all this feminist thought, for example, when it's about gender, or environmental issues, all these green thoughts. And sometimes you just have to ask the question several times and try to suggest some methods. So, for example, when it's about gender equity in, let's say, in the music program of our festival, I will tell people, okay, we're looking for 10 composers' names. If I give you 5 minutes time, you will give me 9 male names and 1 female name. If I give you half an hour and you have more time to think about it, you will maybe come up with more female names. And not female names that we're taking because they're female, but because they're good. It just takes you a little longer to think about them. So this can be a mechanism, for example. And I think we do re-put questions on the table also because sometimes your board changes or society changes, as Marta just mentioned. So I can say that, for example, when we asked the environmental question in 2018, as I said, there was no awareness in our organization that we as cultural organizations should talk about this topic. Actually, that was the first question. And then what happened in the next 2 years was Fridays for Future, the green parties all over Europe winning elections. And suddenly the awareness for the fact that whether I have green ideas or environmental ideas is not just my personal question, but is a question that my association has to address as an association, because that was the main difficulty at the beginning. Suddenly this awareness changed, and suddenly there was no resistance 2 years later. So I think it's really about a process. And I think the last thing is maybe also to be more open as to how. So I mentioned a little bit for the environmental thing that you have to look at different possibilities of how you can achieve aims. But for example, we realized also we can sometimes use music itself. And I think somebody, either Maria, I think you said it at the beginning, we can use music as a tool to talk about the aims that we have. And also when it comes to the inclusion and diversity thing, we just recently had a program committee meeting, which was a bit difficult because somebody was saying like, no, your program is not diverse enough. And they confronted the commission with this. And then we asked back and we said, okay, but how does it have to be more diverse? And then maybe I can have, I can bring in a video. If I cannot bring in the choir or the conductor themselves, I can have a session where I make it a topic to raise awareness, even if maybe my program is not perfect yet. And then maybe the next commissions will have an easier task to get there. So I think this process, and not to give up, if you are somebody in the organization who believes in those aims, not to give up, but to come back to it again and again, and not to feel that it's a failure if you cannot reach all your aims at the beginning.
Yes, and I saw, Holger, you wanted to respond to some of that, so take it away.
Yes, I was, because Sonia was referring to not back then not thinking about it, and then eventually the green movement took place. I experienced it from a slightly different angle, because I was working on green issues for quite some time, and telling people how important it is and climate change, and we all have a role to play, etc., etc. Then finally, Fridays for Future took off, and then the press, who we were always addressing for years, came up and said, shouldn't festivals do something like that? And of course, then you are in a position where you could say, right, we told you, but you didn't want to listen. You could do that, but we didn't, because then we felt, maybe we were just ahead of the time, and that happens. Now we grew some knowledge. Let's use it now, because then now we are needed with all we did in the past to tell the people, and to tell the people in our industry and in the cultural field, just beyond our cultural field, how it is done. I'm very happy that we were able to run a session for the European Music Council at the last year's series for the European Forum on Music, on sustainability and on green issues, and we sorry, lost track somehow by saying nice things about our host, but we now have have also the obligation. We not only have a movement like Fridays for Future now, we also have binding contracts for governments, etc. So of course we all look to big companies, industries, etc. But there will be a point in time when it will be broken down to all of us, to our institutions, on our member institutions, on the events, on many of these cultural institutions who are somehow, in a way, also economic organizations. So they shift money. They also shift emissions, and that means at a certain point in time we will have to measure our impacts. We will have, and therefore, and that's the thing that we tell the people in our cultural field for years and years already. Be prepared for that time. I try to get politicians on sessions like these, or in the conferences that we curate, and that we curate panels for in all over Europe. And I always try to get people from politics, from policymakers, to say, when will we have to deal with goals and numbers? When do we need to calculate? And they were so, I can say. And this year, for the first time, we had an MEP, Dr. Christian Ehler, at Eurosonic, at the online version of Eurosonic in the beginning of the year. And there in our session, he said, in 10 years' time, you will have a sustainable festival, or you're out of the game.
Yeah.
And that's not because he wants it, it's because contracts say so.
Yeah, and I think society demands it. But I think you're right, Holger, Jan, it is very slow, that process. And that is very frustrating if, in fact, you're constantly working on this. But if we're not forced to adhere to certain rules, the actual product that Marta is describing will always be at the core, and it should be at the core. But we also comply with all the financial rules and whatever else rules there are. There was a really interesting judgment this past week in the Netherlands against the Royal Shell company, which now it was sued by one of the environmental organizations, who won the case against Shell, that is now being forced to reduce their CO2 emissions by a huge percentage, which is something that governments haven't been able to get done. And of course, Shell is going to appeal this. But it's a very, very interesting development. I think that it takes that an organization or individuals have to step up and say, you are infringing upon my human rights by going this far. And that's, of course, what Fridays for Future was all about as well. let us
sorry,
take
sorry, Sonia, just one sentence. But the process will not stay that slow.
No, you're right.
As you mentioned, it will not stay that slow, and it might be taking a speed which might be of change, which might be too much for several people. Therefore, be prepared and prepare now.
Yeah. Sonia, did you have your...
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think one thing that we also have to deal with as European networks or European organizers who are not working always in the same country is that there are huge differences in the speed and the awareness. So I think when we look at the environmental issue, there is a European movement and also some European rules. I mean, Germany has just been accused, I think, that our cities are too dirty, the air is too dirty in the cities, and there has been a decision about the fact that the future of young people must be taken into consideration by the governments when doing climate change policy. But in the field of inclusion or in the field of gender equity or even when it comes to the Me Too debate, I've seen enormous differences between the north of Europe, the south of Europe, the west of Europe, the east of Europe, individual countries. And I must say that this sometimes makes it more challenging when you have a European board that has to take decisions for the association to find the right compromise. That was another word that Holger used, because you cannot force the position of one country upon all the others. So sometimes maybe you come from a country that is more fast forward and you are thrown back and you are forced to slow down a bit so that you take everybody on board. Because if you don't take them in, so maybe it's better to do a little bit less, but make sure that you can take everybody in than to push the strongest position and then lose half your members because they don't understand it, because they come from a different culture that in this specific point, and it's not the same for every topic or for every SDG in the different countries. So it's for each topic you have to see how to find the right balance.
Yeah, very, very true point. And I think you just said maybe we're not the right people. I'm wondering, I want to come back to something that Marta said before, just touching on it, the role of education and in fact, the younger generation, because I have 3 children, all of whom are sort of into university age now. And I'm hugely affected by them and by how they think and how they perceive the world and how what they're angry about, but also how all of these challenges completely shape what their career path is going to be. None of them are going to be artists, I'm afraid to say, but they will make a difference in their area of expertise. But so this is something that keeps me busy all the time. And Marta, can you say a little bit, because you are also teaching and you are so working with I think all of you are working with the younger generation. And are you seeing the influence that they have and how they are looking at these kinds of dilemmas?
Oh, absolutely, yes. I mean, I actually do feel that there is a huge amount of determination, so to speak, and kind of and not only enthusiasm, but kind of straightforward way to address these issues among the young generation. And I do learn a lot from them. And it's also, I guess, this is what I've been observing, how do they tackle the issues or how they actually introduce, for instance, the young theater makers who are just graduating, how do they introduce their own working methods and their own working values into the field, how they do accept some ways of working and completely deny and neglect the others, and how they kind of transform by very practice, not by publishing another manifesto, as so to speak, my generation did. We were so busy with all these manifestos, but not so much with the practice, to be very honest. And here, the young generation, they don't bother about the manifestos at all. You really go straight to the practice. And that's one thing that makes me really feeling hopeful sometimes, that actually the change is really around the corner. And I do follow the thoughts of Holger. Yeah, let's better be quick, because the process may seem quite long, but I guess the change is will be quite quick, will happen very soon. as soon as the younger generation will come into the position of really shaping the field. And the one thing that I really find extremely inspiring is exactly the kind of straightforwardness with which they address the issues and they practice them. And the other is that they form the movement already in the school, in the sense that they work collectively. They never work alone, or they rarely work alone. And in that sense, they become much stronger than we were, in the sense that I would say that in my generation, we're all individuals, we're all busy with our own kind of careers or individual, let's say, professional paths. And here I see there much more group thinking, much more collective thinking. Not necessarily, it does not mean the younger generation wants to work only collectively. It's rather that the way how they give feedback to each other, how they support each other, how they feel the kind of, indeed, maybe it's too soon to describe it this way, but kind of generational event, that brings a lot of hope, definitely.
Yeah. Thank you. Holger.
Yes, I wanted, for the sector that I'm working in, you all know that there's hardly a sector which is so close connected to a young audience, and we have so many young people who very intensely identify with the events they are attending, and that also means that they have expectations from or for these events they're going to, build on their own philosophy and their lifestyle. We as festivals have an effect on their lifestyles, but we also have the responsibility to cater for their needs and for what they expect from us. And the organizers, in many cases, are not from the same generation and might have a bit older mindset. So it is our responsibility to keep up with them, to listen to them, to exchange with them, to find out what is important to them, but then still not forget about maybe the philosophy and some proven values that we are standing for history, which made our events so popular and relevant. But this is our task also, to stay relevant and popular in the future, and take them with us on this journey. And we in Europe and our respected working groups work on projects. For example, we have 2 Erasmus projects. One is called Fusion, which uses festivals as social innovation incubators, which just started now, with Take a Stand, and one of our very, very popular festivals, Roskilde Festival in Denmark, which is very well known, is part of that. But we also run an Erasmus project, which is called Future Festival Tools, Green Competency for Event Professionals, which should lead our people in the festival scene and in the event scene to raise the awareness, to raise the competency towards more sustainable production and festival making, to then better meet the needs of our audiences and the young people.
Yeah, I think it is, you need each other. I think it's also a matter of perhaps taking this younger generation a little bit sooner, perhaps into the governance structure. As sometimes it takes forever before they can claim a seat. And I think given the incredible shift that we all have to make, that might also be one of the answers. Sonja, there is a question from Alan Gray, and I wanted to see if you could help us with that. Alan is identifying that it seems rather overwhelming to look at all of these targets and become compliant with all the SDGs as a small organization that is, just trying to keep its head above the water. What would be the role of these cultural networks that we all represent in helping smaller and not so small organizations in that process?
Yes, I think I was also reading this and thinking, well, it can take very long to answer, but I will try to answer in short. I think, first of all, some organizations, like, for example, Culture Action Europe, they've done an analysis in general on how big can the impact of culture be on the different SDGs. And I think depending on in which country you live, there will be some SDGs where you say, yes, culture can play a role, but it's not very essential. And also our negative impact is not very essential. So we may not need to concentrate on that. And then there are others where the role culture can play and also the negative impact culture can have if you don't look at this SDG in your work is much bigger. And I think that what the European Music Council and the partners did, because actually we discussed this when the project was developed, we asked what are for us the essential SDGs, and we chose those three because we had the feeling that these were the three fields where our organizations could change the most, could have the biggest impact on society and on the field, and could most contribute to the SDGs. And I will give one very simple example. I think reducing poverty is an SDG where I feel that my organization will not be able to really make a substantial change, because the changes that are needed for that in society, we can raise our voice for that. That we can do for all SDGs. But beyond that, I felt that we would be pretty powerless. And we did the same exercise, by the way, in our own organization, contributing to the Culture Action Europe one. So we went through all the SDGs and we said, yeah, more or less. And I think if you do that, and then if you will look at the products of the Shift project, because what we're trying to do is actually to help organizations go through this process. So we are working on the different topics on kind of guidelines, handbooks, bibliographies that will help you, maybe a carbon footprint calculator and things like that, that will help an organization at least make some choices. And I think the main message will be, think of what Holger said, you will not change the world in one day in your organization either. You have to make priorities, look at what is the most important topic for your organization, maybe also what are your members or your users identifying as the most important or most urgent issue at that point, and start with that and then add to it bit by bit. Don't try to do all SDGs and all targets at the same time. You will drown in that. Yeah.
It's 17 SDGs. It doesn't mean you have to address 17 SDGs. It's an offer, and it shows you what can be done, but you cannot do everything. And to answer Sonja, if they decide they cannot do something on working against poverty, some others might think that's theirs. We as a festival, together with an organization, we help poor kids getting educated, etc., and therefore come out of poverty. So we can do this. Therefore, Sonja and her association can do something which we can't, and that, in the end, in the addition, makes what culture can do for the SDGs.
That is an amazing end to this discussion, or temporary end, because we're going to continue it immediately in the breakout rooms. We're ready for that now. We're going to distribute you randomly, and Ruth is going to say something about that in a minute still. There have been facilitators assigned, and we're not with a huge crowd, so it'll be great because you'll have time to really keep on talking. Our speakers will all be in these breakout rooms. Now, I want to give you, just to have something to think about, the following two questions into the breakout room. The first is about adaptation of work. So what kind of changes have you seen in the music and performing arts sector in recent years, which would include the pandemic, and which of these would influence the music and performing arts life in the medium or long term? So it's really based on everything we've talked about. How is work, art making changing, and music making changing? And the second question is, what kind of positive experiences and ideas emerged during the pandemic and could perhaps continue afterwards? For instance, alternative ways of performing and producing, which ways that might prove to last longer than just being an emergency solution. So that is more about what emerged from the crisis. So these are two questions to guide your conversation. And I don't want you to come back to us later on giving us full minutes of your conversation, but tell us a few really excellent ideas that we can take away to integrate into our process. Because we're talking about how to deal with this value clash. And it would be fantastic to take a few ideas away with us that could really inspire us in our work. So Ruth, we're here. We're all ready to be beamed up. So you take it away.
Yes, thank you very much. Thanks for very inspiring panel so far. Just some housekeeping. As Maria already announced, you will all be allocated to one room. If for some reason you will get lost on your way to this room, you can always reconnect through the program button in the lobby of our event platform. And if for any reason also you find yourself alone in your room, or maybe with only 2 or 3 other persons, you can just leave the session and also reconnect. There will be someone in this main room, so to say, and then be able to distribute you to another group. And now I ask Katharina to press the button. She will also press the button to bring us automatically back to the plenary. So unfortunately, your debate might be interrupted, but technically speaking, there's no other way we can do this. So it's the first time for EMC to use this conference platform. So let's see what happens. See you later. Katharina?
Thank you all for coming back. And I did have an opportunity to pop into all of the rooms. Only in one of them did you see me, because then I figured out how I could come in unseen. So the other two, I was in there. Room 2, you were very good to change rooms to have a bigger crowd. So we have reports from 3 groups here, which is great because it gives us a little bit more time. So I'm going to go straight to you. I heard wonderful things, and a big important quote is, we have interesting times ahead of us. I think that's very true. We're in the midst of it. And with that, I'm going to breakout room 1. And I think it's Victoria who is reporting. Is that correct? Victoria, are you there? So I don't know who has to do that. Ah, there she is. See?
Nice to see you.
Take it away.
Yeah, I'm not sure we have 3 main things, but I think I will be able to wrap up what we said quite shortly anyway. We discussed technology as the biggest change, perhaps because of the pandemic, but where we noticed most differences and also positive effects. That we tried online teaching. Some members tried online teaching already from 2015, but with the pandemic, of course, everything got a lot better. And also that we have been networking more and collaborating more because of the pandemic, because of being forced to do so. And also programming has perhaps become more risky and less, not just traditional as it used to be. And of course, there's a big need to meet, and a live concert will always be better than an online concert. But we realized that you can go to a concert, and the ones who cannot go to the concert, they can see it online. So it's still a good thing. And then we discussed more how to make changes. How can we make important changes without a crisis? And it was brought up just creating awareness and using time to create awareness, to create change is important. As a bit of what Sonja said earlier, you have to dedicate time to make change. And also what came up in this session this morning, that we have to communicate outside of our sector the importance of culture, and this was also a positive effect that had been seen, the status of the artist. So that change, we have to communicate it more. And lastly, that we can't be satisfied. I think it was nicely put. we have to keep being unsatisfied, because that's how we want to make more changes. So, and I said that if anyone else wants to say something from group 1, you can feel free to do so, but that's what my notes say.
Yeah, I was there when the conversation turned to never being satisfied. And I wrote that down because I think that it's actually, in a way, at the heart of a lot of art making, is this sense of, you're constantly triggered by something around you, and artists can thrive by those conditions of uncertainty often much better than many of us do, because it inspires work and art making. And I think it's a really interesting sort of space to be in, and that many of us, if we're not in the art making, are try to tick all the boxes and get it done and be satisfied. But it may be really good to embrace that state. Really good thought. So that's an idea to take away as well. Thank you, Victoria. Then we're taking a leap to breakout room 3. And is it Michalis who is reporting on behalf?
Yes.
Take it away.
Hello. We started with a question, actually. Okay, how does the sector restart? Actually, that was a question that we all kind of tried to answer, and we discussed that there are 2 approaches that we see right now, that we kind of feel that we are near the end of the pandemic. That one approach is restarting responsibly, trying to rethink and reshape our practices and do things better after the pandemic. But at the same time, we see the sector that there's a need for people, for professionals to get back working as soon as possible, earn money, earn their living, actually, and this kind of maybe feels like to contradict with the other approach. But we are the people, I think, that we need to take care of this and try to readjust things. Then we say that discussing, David said that we see that there are many periphery and ancillary jobs at the sectors are being lost during the pandemic, and not just the artists, but the people that are around the industry. They change their jobs, they change their occupations, and especially for big cities that they used to have a big sector. It's not easy to get these capacities again, to find people again, to readjust again and restart so easy. It will take time to rebuild the infrastructure, let's say, the human infrastructure. Then again, we talk about the digital tools. We think that we all agree that some things are here to stay, and some tools are very helpful for everyone, especially the tools that bring people together, that makes easier to get people together to discuss and to exchange ideas. But at the same time, we all again agree that digital forms cannot substitute the live experience. Some let's say some examples, we think that they might stay in the future. That is relates to some hybrid models of performances, and this is something that we think that we will use, we will see in the future. Also, that we need to rethink and make music, as David said, digital compatible. So we need to rethink the music sector and make it digital compatible. But to finish again in a positive note, one positive thing that came out of this pandemic is that it got people to really feel that they need to get organized and they need to get together and they need to share values and discuss their values and come together towards a common cause. And this is certainly something that is going to stay in for the near future.
Thank you, Michalis. I agree. And I think there is some very interesting work happening in that field right now. And really need to stay connected to that. Thank you. Thank you for group 3. And now turning to group 4, and I think probably that's going to be done by Katarina, because she has appeared on the stage.
Yes, that will be me. Thank you very much, Maria. So at the beginning of our breakout, we discussed for quite some time about not necessarily about the questions we were given, but exchange our experience of working in countries, let's say, with maybe more difficult governments inside Europe and outside Europe. So with of course, very questionable approach to freedom of expression and human rights and all of that, and how in our organization we have approaches, how we have dealt with it. And one thing that we said is that, of course, going there will not change the complete system in these countries. We are all aware of that, but there is certainly a possibility to make small changes. It can be a drop, was one of the quotes, but the importance is to have trustworthy or a trustful relationship with a local partner. That is really important when you are working in countries with a different framework. So that was a part one of what we talked about them, but then the conversation also moved more about to the questions that we had, and what kind of experiences we take away from this pandemic. And some of the positive aspects that were mentioned was especially with those of us in association, and increased communication actually with our members within the membership through these digital tools, and more regularly communicating with members. But also sometimes, of course, it's not a replacement for life experiences, but there were some fantastic digital concerts and really creatively implemented to use these digital channels to get to experience a concert, at least in this format. Well, we couldn't yet in real life. And then some of the things that was also mentioned, maybe to take from it in terms of music education, to maybe use blended learning a lot more. That, of course, the direct contact between teacher and students is important, but that an addition of online can be beneficial as well. And as a last point, we said with kind of bringing this all together, this digital communication has reached a lot of new people many times, but we should never forget that it can at the same time exclude others as well. And we could have, I think, talked for quite some time, but that's where our discussion ended.
Thank you, Katarina. And I think that was true in all of the rooms. The conversation was so engaged and active, and that also means it's a topic that's really top of mind for all of you. And thank you all for contributing so actively to that. I think it's time for me to wrap up. I do want to thank you all for the open and inspiring conversation and the candor with which you all participated. I come away with many good ideas, and I hope you all do. It's a complex topic, and I do feel like this conversation will go on for some time. Remember, Holger told us we don't have to go for the 100%. It's really important to start the process and be prepared. Stay unsatisfied. What you can't do, maybe somebody else can do. And I think that's a really good idea to take away from here. For me, working on sustainability in all of its aspects is shaping my own compass, how I take decisions, but also that of my organization more and more. And that is actually a really fast process. So that is really true. And in that way, all of us can be a positive force for this world. So thank you all for that and for that inspiration, and particular thanks to Sonja, Marta, and Holger for being with us today and sharing your stories. And thank you to the European Music Council for bringing us together. Ruth, it's back to you for a surprise fourth speaker. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much for the interesting reports from the breakout groups, and of course for this whole session full of inspirations. We had invited Dirk Kaftan, who is the chief conductor, musical director in Bonn of the Beethoven Orchestra in Bonn, to also join this panel. Unfortunately, he was not available to join us live, but he sent a video message, and he also offered us to stream the Piccola Pastorale, a very special production of the Pastoral Symphony of Beethoven, and you will be able to listen to this once this session has ended. So I will now start the video message by Dirk Kaftan. I would say very much to the point of this discussion, as if you would have been here, and I'll let you enjoy the pastoral after that. And I wish you a very, very nice evening. Maybe you will enjoy some more of our musical program, or even watch the film that we have for you in the conference platform. And then we see each other again tomorrow. Thanks a lot. Just need to find the good video. There we go.
Hello, my name is Dirk Kaftan. I'm the chief conductor of the Beethoven Orchestra in Bonn. Our orchestra has just been appointed to the UN Ambassador of Climate Change. And therefore we are the first musical institution to carry this title. This is of course not a reward or a prize. It's a mission. We are just starting, and we're building this mission on 3 columns. First of all, we start with ourselves. What can we as private persons, as musicians, in our everyday life contribute against climate change? The second column is connecting to initiatives and supporting certain projects. And the third and maybe most important column is how can we communicate by the measures of music and arts. Of course, this communication has to cross the borders of political parties and should not be expressed as a protest culture, but as a positive force to take part in a change of thinking and a change of seeing the world. So our job is to support the goals of the United Nations, the sustainability goals. And if you look at the goals, you will agree that many of them correspond to music in a perfect way. If you take education, equality of gender, if you take human rights, if you take health, I'm talking about mental health, the health of our souls in the times of the pandemic. There are many, many goals in which you find music as a symbol to, of course, already have been started to change this development of mind. Now I'm inviting you to join our Piccola Pastorale, which is a document of this pandemic time, document from the time where musicians weren't allowed to meet, where winds had to spread apart, not to become a danger of health to each other. And nevertheless, it's a symbol how music and arts find their way across the concrete, across the asphalt, to remain the symbol of sustainability and the force to change the world. So I hope you will feel the spirit, even if it's a very special version of the Pastorale, a short version, a version that's that's been arranged for less than a huge symphony orchestra. And I hope to connect to you and see you soon. Warm greetings to the European Music Council.